line, Rob McCann, Councillor Holbrook, Councillor Pravanov, and Katie Spies. And Jake, welcome to this meeting. In the capacity of Regional Council?
No, I'll put low carbon company.
Low carbon company. Yep, you're welcome. Cool. Yeah, Brandy.
Morena Koto, thanks for having us this morning. Like I was just saying to Guru, actually, because I have not done, I'm sorry? No. Oh, excuse me, to the mayor.
No, Guru's fine. I'm flying already.
I know. I have a presentation to run through because if you recall, I think most of you were here. We have a few new people, which is lovely for the workshop, but we had a briefing on the 9th of August where we began to talk about the idea of setting a district-wide emissions reduction target. And there were three things that were decided at that workshop. We wanted to, or that briefing, excuse me, we wanted to repeat this at a public workshop so members of the public could come and listen and comment if they'd like. We wanted to get some feedback from the community, if possible, before we moved forward. And we wanted to make sure that Mana Whenua representatives to the different council committees had absolutely been invited to the workshop as well. So there will be slightly a bit of repetition in what we're saying today. Some of it we covered on the 9th of August, but that's only because I want to make sure we bring all the new people on board as well. So what are we going to cover today? Oh, we're pulling up my PowerPoint. Thank you. Didn't even realize. That's okay. From here, am I able to drive? Yep. Great. What targets currently exist? So what targets are already out there that would influence us as a council? What are the community's views? So we did this very quickly. If you recall, our last meeting was on 9th of August. We very quickly borrowed a survey that had been conducted by Wellington City Council a few years back, and we ran an online survey from the 19th of August to the 19th of September. You had 612 respondents. I say online, but it was also in the newspaper. People could fill it out, mail in hard copies, drop it off at the libraries, and people did those as well. So what are the community's views? How might you set a target if you do decide you want to do one, and what would our next steps be? So let's start briefly with what targets currently exist. As we've been saying on the 9th of August, it is interesting to think about the way that our local council sits within this much wider framework. Of course, we have the international targets that have been set at the the most recent one set at the Glasgow Climate Pact. Global emissions cut 50% by 2030 in order to cap warming at 1.5 C. It's also interesting to note, I'd only recently realized this, that at that meeting, New Zealand also signed the Supporting the Conditions for a Just Transition Internationally Declaration. The next global meeting will be in Egypt in a few months, and there's been some discussions about will the target change between now and then. Falling down from that, more importantly, at the national level, we have our nationally determined contribution. That is 50% reduction of net emissions below our gross 2005 level by 2030. And then we have what's in the Climate Change Response Act, and I think this is what most people are working towards. Net zero GHG emissions by 2050, excluding biogenic methane, and that one would be cut by 24 to 47% by 2050, 10% by 2030. So it is interesting to think about top down. We do have targets that we sit within, and we want to make sure that everything that we do aligns with that as much as possible. If anything, we might then think about if we want to move more quickly, and we'll come to that in a minute. What do other councils do? You'll look at most councils, Wellington City, Hutt, Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, they start by looking at the Climate Change Response Act. Net zero by 2050 for most. Christchurch and Dunedin have decided to go a little more assertive by 2045 and 2030. It's interesting that Jake's here. He might be able to speak to this because we had this debate. Wellington Regional Council definitely has a organizational target. But in terms of district or region-wide, it's to ensure the region contributes to net zero by 2050. That's what I found in their documents. I raised this because I know, Councillor Holborough, you brought this up on the 9th of August, that there might be more there than we were acknowledging.
I can
Okay.
comment on that.
Great.
The regional,
Oh, yeah.
Greater Wellington in the draft regional policy statement adopted a target of 50% reduction by 2030 compared to 2019.
Okay.
That's very new and it's still draft.
Okay. Great. Part of this discussion was as well, there had been some concern that we were potentially out of line with the rest of the councils in the region. And outside of Wellington City, Hutt City, and now we're here in Greater Wellington, there are no other councils in the region that have set a district-wide target. They are working on it. Upper Hutt and Masterton are working on it. They might have made some progress since my 9th of August discussion. But at the moment, other than organizational emissions, the others do not have the district-wide either, or citywide. Now, most importantly, I think this is the newest and best information that we have to talk about. What are the community's views? So like I said, we very quickly put together a survey. We based it on one that Wellington City Council had done. Online and in the newspaper, 12 questions, plus a few demographic questions. 612 people responded to the survey, which was a really good response rate for that period of time. We had 99.7%, basically all except for just one or two were submitted as individuals. Low Carbon Capity put in a submission, and we had one other organization that I was aware of put in a submission. The first question that and one thing I did want to add to the counselors, I've summarized the data here, but they have also uploaded to your online portal. You have all of the individual submissions are there in a PDF if you at a later stage want to go through them. How concerned are you about climate change in general? You'll notice 56.1% of respondents were very concerned, 19% concerned. So 75.1% of the respondents were concerned or very concerned. There are a few that are not at all concerned or not too concerned, and that continues to be a theme throughout the survey, but it is interesting. How concerned are you about climate change in Capity was the next question. 73% concerned, very concerned, 26.5% not too concerned or not at all concerned. So once again, though, you do have a majority of respondents that are concerned about the issue, but you also have some that aren't, and I guess that's something that you as counselors, as we go through, will have to make some decisions about. Do you think there are actions that we can take, not just for council, but as council, residents, businesses, and Mana Whenua, that will help reduce the impacts of climate change? 76.6% said yes, we do think there are things that we can do. 15.5% said no, and as I go through, we'll have a little bit more information about some of those no respondents. We threw this question in because when Wellington City Council asked this question, they were trying to measure a sense of efficacy with the public. How do you think it's possible that we can do anything? And they felt that there was, while they felt that there were people, they had a high percentage of respondents who felt that there were actions that could be taken. Very few felt that they were actually going to be able to make a difference. So with that in mind, Wellington City Council is developing a information type of public information campaign to try and boost people and help them feel that there's things that can be done and that it's worthwhile to do. You might want to speak to that later because I'm not sure if I stated that really clearly. Should the Kapiti Coast District Council set an emissions reduction target? That's really one of the most important questions. 64% say yes. 30% say no. 6% are not sure. Are you prepared to take, sorry, let me get to my notes. I can't read my full question. It's too high, and I don't know how to remove that little banner up there. Sorry.
This one.
Oh, yeah. Are you prepared to take actions to reduce your carbon footprint? 58.3 said yes, it must be done no matter what. Oops. 26.6 said maybe. It depends on how much it costs or benefits me. Oh, thank you for that. 12.2% said no. If the Kapiti Coast District were to have a climate change target, should it be quickly established, carefully researched, or a combination? For example, like we showed you with some of the other councils like Wellington City or Hutt, they have a high level that maybe is 2050 that aligns with the national CC, the Climate Change Act. But then they also have a shorter term target that might be more ambitious. So 52.4% say we'd like you to go with a combination. You'll notice that I've been putting up at the top how many people respond to each question, the sample size, and I highlighted here, this is 580. So not everyone responded to this question out of 612. And in people where they have the opportunity to make a comment, some people wrote, I told you from the start I don't think we should have one, so I'm not even going to answer your question. So we only had 580 there. In the area where local councils do have some influence, should council prioritize taking actions that will support and enable our district to meet whatever target we set? 58.3% say yes, it must be done. Once again, 28.6% maybe, it depends on how much it costs me. As we go through to the part where they can provide more feedback, we start to unpack that concerns about costs. We'll get there in just a minute. If we agree that we must all work together to reduce emissions, which approach do you think will most successfully help us achieve lower emissions? So if you combine, the 37%, that's focus on reducing our current volume of emissions. 27.8% is focus on reducing emissions first, then followed by offsetting in some way. 64.7, combining those, say let's focus on reducing emissions. 21.3% say we really want to focus on sequestration, planting trees, something along those lines. 5.6% focus on offsetting. What is interesting, though, is when we get to shortly, there's quite a few people who replied, if you spend $1 on purchasing carbon credits, I will be furious. Do not do that. So that's something interesting to think about as well. How do you get to carbon neutrality? How quickly do we need to make these changes? 67.3% combined said very quickly or quickly. Now this I know is too difficult for you to read, so bear with me, I'm going to read some of it out. I wanted to get it all on one slide. So how important is it for council to focus on each of the following areas? The very first, the top row up here, is use land use planning to create neighborhoods that support low carbon living. The second one is improve transport infrastructure. This one is advocating to central and regional government for public transport. Then we go to providing advice to households and businesses on reducing energy and waste. Ways of attracting low carbon businesses and enterprises. Supporting local renewable energy generation. Explore opportunities for district-wide carbon sinks and other nature-based solutions. Grants or funding for community-based initiatives, and advocating for central government investment to help our communities transition. So the darker blue-purple color, the kind of the lilac-y, is very important. Then the light blue is somewhat. Then we get to neutral, a little bit important, not important at all. That's me reading from right to the left. So by far, the most important thing for people appears to be advocating for central and regional government. Yeah, for transport. Followed by improving our own transport infrastructure. Followed by land use planning. And then more with advocating for central government investment. Some of the things that people, if you wanted to go in the other direction, that people think were the least important might be providing grants or facilitating funding and finding ways to attract low-carbon businesses and enterprise to Kapiti. Once again, when we get back to concerns about costs and rates, we'll see why I think some people replied in that way. What is the best way to drive behavior change? Once again, we only had 584 people reply to this. 33% is educate and incentivize, 25% mainly educate and incentivize, but maybe some charging and regulating. 33% we must do both. We'd very few just saying charging and regulating all the way. So well over half are definitely feeling that education and incentivizing is a role of council, or it seems to be something that we need. I wouldn't say that. It's a key way to drive behavior change. Now this is a bit of a dog's breakfast here. 323 people responded to the 12th question, which was, do you have anything more you want to tell us? And of course, some of those people, they mentioned a lot of things. And this gets really interesting in my opinion. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I know that those of you that are online, I don't think you can see that I'm using the laser pointer. 41 people said, I'm really concerned about my rates. I'm really concerned about my cost increase. Some people are saying, you know what, you need to stick to the core of what council needs to do, and I'm not sure if this is a part of it. What is interesting is that I noticed people defined core slightly differently. Some people just talked about infrastructure. Other people talked more about housing, education, health. There's still surprisingly 26 people that were really clear. I wouldn't say surprisingly, but 26 people are really clear that they are not convinced that we need to do anything here at all, that they don't believe in climate change, they don't believe the science. But then there were also 15 people who said, we have a national plan. We think we're duplicating efforts here. This is not the role of council. We need to just get in line with what national would like us to do, national government, I mean. And there were 15 people that said this is a global issue. I'm not actually convinced that there's anything that we can do about this that would make a huge difference. And that started to connect with concerns about where do we put our money. I do want to say we're doubling up here. These are not, 26 people said I don't believe, then 15 more people said this. This is just summarizing for each topic how many people mentioned it. 12 people said please focus on local issues first. We have a lot of really big issues that we need to deal with, mainly housing and rates. Some people said, I'm happy for you to do this, but do not put more money into this. Can we look at what other programs we're doing and redirect existing funds? So that related to, things like Three Waters, gateways, airport, who knows what. Some people made comments, others didn't. There were definitely 12 people who felt it was a terrible survey, and I thought I'd point that out because we did throw it together very quickly. I acknowledge that. They felt that it was biased. So for example, with the questions like, if we were to agree, they weren't even going to accept that, some people. So they felt that it was biased, and I did note there were some typo errors in the survey that really offended some people. Now going down to what else is important, how would we make change? I tried to kind of put these columns together. 33% said it's very much about new building, consenting, how we build, what we incentivize. We should be creating pathways for alternative energy type of developments, for trees, making requirements for new builds and old builds. Or by that I mean remodels. The district plan, 27 people. Land use planning is absolutely important. What can we do to promote alternative energy, whether that be heating, solar, wind? People brought that up in different ways. Can we create incentives? Can we do streamlining of consenting processes? Can we even provide advice? A few people referred to not saying that they wanted us to bring in-house an eco-design advisor, but knowing that there are councils that provide more services like that. Some people, and I'll notice here in these with adaptation, flooding, coastal, if someone just said adaptation without referring to flooding or coastal, I just marked it as adaptation. Some people specifically related to flooding, others coastal, but some people said, I think at this stage the best use of our money is adaptation, adaptation, adaptation. Can we do both, basically? Some people talked about food security. They talked about the importance of protecting land that is good for growing. They also talked about, when we get over to greening the communities, they talked about urban gardens, community gardens, all of those things. A few people talked about what can we as council do to try and promote broadband, businesses with jobs, so people don't have to commute. Is there anything we could do in that area? Public transportation was, of course, a big one. 27 people talked about the bus and the train services. We know what we need there. Waste services, 27 people. And within waste services, not only did they talk about the current systems, but the need for better green waste, the need for better usage of plastic, things like, where can we take our plastic? When I say green space, people talked about planting trees, planting native trees, community gardens, wetlands, blue, what's the word there? Blue carbon. Infrastructure for other modes of transport, 18 people continued to talk about that, the need to continuously keep building better, safe, more connected bikeways, cycleways, motor scooter, etc. What I thought was interesting is there were 10 people that talked about how important it is to provide infrastructure for electric cars and incentives. Whereas then on the other hand, we had 9 people saying, we don't think you should invest in electric cars. Some because they don't believe that electric cars are environmentally friendly, but others because they just thought we're not going to get the infrastructure together in time. So those were their thoughts. 4 people were promoting more about shared vehicles, e-scooters, things like what you see in the bigger cities. And some people talked about rural and older residents. The push on active transport is harder for them sometimes. In terms of how we make the change, 28 people promoted, once again, how we can incentivize. And there was some crossover with consenting and how we can encourage people to, do greener designing. But people also talked about what can you just do for homes and families, rates rebates, or LED light bulbs at a discount, things like that. 23 people just wanted to drive home. They feel that this is absolutely urgent and that council needs to stop doing surveys, stop asking questions, and just get on with this. 14 people said it's really important that equity and how we do this transition is also really important. We don't want to do anything to disadvantage some families that are already struggling. 12 continued to argue that it's really important that we have an education function, that we continue to support and educate the community. We embed this across council. Several people talked about, I think that this should become a part of everything, purchasing, supply chain, how you build your infrastructure. Is it low carbon? A few people talked about if you were going to those question we ask about educating versus regulating and monitoring. If there is a regulating function, we need to be absolutely certain that we fund it properly. Council staff cannot do this without being properly resourced for it. And some people suggested, why don't we start by going after the biggest emitters in the district outside of council? We're already working on our own, but who are the other really big emitters? Maybe we work with them very closely. People emphasize the importance of youth. What I thought was interesting as well, I'm just coming into the very last column and then we're through. 23 people talked about degrowth. There is more of a movement about growth, degrowth. Do we want to promote growth? Have we reached the limits of growth? How do we start to, connect that to land use planning and other things that we do? 9 people really emphasize that this must be, any targets we set need to be evidence-based. They need to have a plan. 7 talked about, once again, like I said earlier, no carbon credits. There were some that said, listen, this is really important, but we don't need Kapiti Coast District Council to be a leader. We don't have the funding for that. There are lots of people doing really great things. We'd love for you to align with them. That could be within the region, but also even at an international level. Some people talked about some of the international Race to Zero type of campaigns. Once again, council doesn't need to hold all the expertise. There's a lot of local expertise that we should be drawing on, supporting, funding, using. It's very important that we don't just greenwash and virtue signal, that some people said aspirational, it's important to have aspirational targets, but we also need to really be realistic about what the plan is and how we support it. And of course, really important, let's not forget the value of Indigenous knowledge and how we can incorporate that into our plans. Other things that came up were really minor, like it might have been 1-2 people mentioned standard issues, because we say, is there anything else you want to tell council? So the gateway, Three Waters, the airport, all those kind of important issues. So there are a few more slides about if we do set a target, how would we set it? What are the next steps? But I wonder, because I just presented quite a bit of information about the survey, are there any questions or comments about the survey before we move to the next step?
Can you take us? Nope. Nine.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is there? Oh, yes.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you, Brandy, for this. I know at times I can be critical of surveys, but I have to say in this instance, given, as you said, the short time frame this was done, that you've managed to get quite a substantial number of responses, and the amount of information that I suppose the richment of this information is fantastic.
Oh, good. Thank you.
That's a lovely comment from you. Right, anybody with a question? Nope. Oh, yeah. Sophie.
Will these slides be made available as well, so they can be circulated with the wider public, to the wider public?
Absolutely. If
Yeah.
everyone's okay with that, absolutely.
Cool.
Right, nope.
Okay. So going back to the discussion that we had on the 9th of August, if you recall, we started with, well, what do other people do? What do we have at an international, national, regional level? What are the other targets that are out there that we work within? Then we wanted to get some feedback from the community. Based on this survey that we've done, I definitely think there is a strong interest in us having a target. There's value in that, but we also see there is a small portion that are very concerned about what it means for their rates and what the plan would be, what kind of work council would do. So what would the next steps be if we were to set a target? So like I've been saying, this is a little bit repetitive from 9th of August, but just for those of you that are new, one approach is that we set that aspirational target to align with the Climate Change Response Act. So we know without a doubt, if on a national level it's net zero by 2050, well, we certainly have to fall within that as well. And if anything, you would think about if you wanted to be a little more ambitious with that. But that's one approach. At the minimum, that might be what you want to do. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but if you were to say net zero by 2050, or what would 50% reduction by 2030 look like, this doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but on a very basic level, you could just look at the data that we had from 2018-19. Currently, from what I understand at the Wellington region, we will be having another regional stock take, district-wide stock take undertaken, but this was the most recent data I had from 2018-19. You can see if we wanted to go 50% by 2030, we would just need to do that. But the reality is we would need to think about how might that happen. From 2001 to 2019, we had an 11% increase in our gross emissions, and we had a 43% increase in our net emissions. And that is because there was quite a bit of logging that took place in the district in that time period. So what's interesting about that net zero by 2050 is you get into this discussion of, are there parts of it that are a little bit beyond our control? So something to think about. I won't belabor that anymore, but just thinking about if we went with that basic aspirational target, what might it mean for us? This is a breakdown of what that 2018-19 data looked like. And I'm saying here a second approach is to look more carefully at this and really think, what would we do? How might it look? What's interesting about this is these were our gross emissions for that time period. This is where we had some native and exotic forest sequestration, but this is that harvesting that took place in our district, and that led to our net emissions. Even just looking at net emissions, it's important to remember, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but that can be broken down by category. Transportation is the big one. For that, we have, mainly light vehicle usage, petrol, diesel, a little bit of jet fuel. Petrol and diesel emissions have increased by 48% since 2001. So once again, what do we do if we're going to continue to try and bring that down? National and regional targets are being developed at the moment. The regional targets should be done, I think, within a week or two. And we'll have more information on what we have to adhere to anyways in that space. Stationary energy. What's interesting is, according to this, 42% of our energy usage tends to be industrial, 22% residential, 17% commercial. Agriculture has been decreasing in Capity since 2001, our agricultural emissions, and that is because agriculture itself has been decreasing the number of animals in our district. Waste, 92% of our emissions at that time were from solid waste. Actually, I don't think in this I have the wastewater, the new wastewater data. Industry, forest. So the reason, I'm not going to spend more time here, but basically what you could imagine is if you wanted to break this down by sector, each sector could have targets, pathways, starting with something like transport, right? That being the really big one. Scenario modeling allows us to compare the different types of targets and pathways that we might want to propose or think about. This is one, this is something that was used, borrowed from Wellington City Council. They've used a model that's readily available. What they wanted to see was, they decided, say they wanted to go for a 57% reduction by 2030, equally across all sectors. Something like this will give us a sense of what we might need to do. This is transport once again. Oops, pushed the wrong button. So that's one way to think about it. If we wanted to be consistent across sectors, we could model it, see what we would need to do. Another way to look at it, and this is a tool from Greater Wellington Regional Council, you can look at you could look at the impact of different interventions within sectors. So based on this example here, this is energy use to 2050 under business as usual. This over here, with this tool that Greater Wellington has created, you can actually select indicators to make transitions, to make changes. So if we went for the most extreme option within transport, meaning people traveled overall 20% less than they do today, 30% of all travel would be via public or active transport. We would have occupancy increasing in each passenger vehicle to 1.86. 80% of light vehicle travel was in battery electric vehicles and 20% in plug-in hybrids. Bus fleets and all trains were fully electrified. Car fuel efficiency improved. And there are other factors related to freight, aviation, and marine transport. We would still be looking at this. So basically, I'm not trying to suggest that it can't be done, but we need to be quite serious about, if we wanted to aim for some transport emissions reductions, we would need to somehow think of a way to really drive some changes. We'd have to be very brave. The last thing I wanted to say is there's also this concept of fair share. When I talked about Wellington City Council, they're using the World Wildlife Fund's One Planet City Challenge, and they look at the Human Development Index. So the Human Development Index is for the entire country, and it would suggest that because of the standard of living in New Zealand, the HDI, our fair share might be more. So they're going for 57% by 2030. With Capity, it's interesting because you could, if you wanted to think about fair share and equity, you can look at it in two ways. On an international level, absolutely, we might find that New Zealand has a higher HDI compared to many other countries, but we do have pockets of poverty without the country. So I think I only bring this up because it's important to think about equity, and it's important to do as much as we can, but we have heard from some of our residents that they are concerned about their rates. Capity is 8% of the region's gross emissions, 11% of the region's net emissions. And one of the things that Jake made reference to with Wellington City Council, with the regional growth framework, the different plans that are being developed, there is a thought of what would the region-wide targets be and how would Capity contribute to that? What do we need to do? So that's a third thing to think about. So where am I going with this? What are the next steps? Do you set an aspirational target that falls directly out of the Climate Change Response Act? Do you set an evidence-based target based on scenario modeling across the various subsectors? Do we do both? As you did see, the majority of respondents here think that we should do a combination of the two. That might mean that by 2050 you set net zero, but by 2030 you do additional modeling to determine what those targets would be and what the pathways would be and what plans we would need to have in place and what council's role would be. Other considerations, how do you address this fair share aspect across our district? Do you want to go faster than the national average, or do we want to think about different pockets in our community? Not sure. What are your thoughts on purchasing carbon credits? Is net zero really possible without that? Some of your respondents have made it really clear that they do not want to see that as an option. And then what is the role of council in supporting the attainment of the target? And for any targets that we do set, do you want to then develop a plan and think about how we fund council's role, what it might be and what you fund? Like some of the respondents said, they didn't necessarily want to see more funding, but maybe a redirecting of funding. So something to think about as you move into the next LTP. So what we would propose, I think I'm kind of, people did say the survey was biased in some ways, but I feel like I am leading you to what I think is in my opinion, the preferred option. I think that insetting and offsetting and pathway levers and scenario modeling is actually very detailed. I think that we would want to get some additional expert advice if you feel that you do want to go down this path. In February 2023, after the election, we would come back to you with additional information, with some proposed plans that would align with what you're doing with your corporate emission targets as well. And then maybe we would bring a decision report back to you in March, and that starts to lead into the development of the next long-term plan as well, where you could think about the different programs that you might want to support any decisions that you make, what council's role would be.
Cool.
That is my last slide. There are a few more slides, but they're just additional notes. What I didn't put up here, and I have it at the end, I won't go through it in detail, but it's the where do you live, what is your age, all that stuff from the slides. And I will say we had a really nice, I thought, district-wide response rate. We also had, surprisingly, a really good response rate from what is your age, except for in the 14 to 18 or even under 14. We didn't have a lot of young people. Yeah.
Right. Any questions? No questions. Any comments? Can I just ask, we had Energize Otaki here. So are you in touch with groups who are already doing stuff on the ground, how that would fit to where we want to go, or we haven't decided where we want to go and therefore we cannot hitch our wagon to that horse which is starting to move?
Do you want to speak to that? 'Cause I know you work with them more.
Yep, we are definitely collaborating with Energize Otaki. We've got ongoing conversations because we also use the solar electricity to power the wastewater treatment plant. We're very much aware of the program that they have just received council funding for as well. So if we are going towards this district-wide target, it totally makes sense to partner up very closely with organizations in the community that have very capable people on board to help us work towards that target. Yes.
Cool. Martin.
Right, correct me if I'm wrong here. That information looked really daunting to me. That's a fair call?
I'm not sure what you mean by
Well,
daunting.
we've basically gone backwards with regards to general emissions and that sort of scenario. We've got a hell of a lot of work to do as a country, or as from a global perspective, and that sort of stuff there as well. Just clarifying that I'm on the right track for that.
That is completely correct.
Yep,
Our
okay.
emissions have continued to grow despite everybody in the world knowing it needs to go the other way.
And I'm
Yes.
sorry to state the obvious, but I just wanted to make that clear. So what I've also heard, though, in the past is, as a council, from an internal perspective, we aren't doing too bad. We are heading in the right direction. Would that be a fair comment?
Yes, Jake, who's sitting here at the table, started our carbon reduce program. And we have, based on the very, very preliminary thinking of the last audit over the previous year, hit 78% out of our 80% target, which I think is an awesome achievement because we set that target 10 years ago and the world has changed a lot since then. Also, our district has changed a lot, so we've done quite well. And we are going through the audit on the 5th of October. That is our corporate emissions. We're doing that feasibility study on solar that we've talked about earlier. And once we have all those outcomes together, we were going to come back in February to talk about the corporate emissions target, which at the moment is carbon neutrality by 2025.
Right, okay. So then it would also be a fair comment that the wider community, not so much, haven't done so great.
We have, in the last 3 years, really focused on getting our house in order, if you wish. So we have worked on embedding climate change thinking through our current LTP. We focused on reviewing and possibly resetting our corporate target emissions and doing the last year of that. And then we are advertising right at the moment for an educator in this carbon space. And that's when we wanted to broaden our horizons to a district-wide target, which is
But that comes back
doing.
to what I've said before as well, that each individual person needs to be starting to make decisions with regards to how they're impacting on both their personal situations and perhaps their work environments as well. And we can only educate in that space, or we can legislate. So would it be a fair comment to say then, because we're basically looking at internal versus external, what we can and can't do. So, and I'll use cruise as an example here, but do we need to see basically national policy intervention here that gives a standardised approach moving forward? Do we need to be advocating for that? Because I don't see any other, I personally don't see any other way with regards to, because like, take for argument's sake, we dropped hazard lines on limbs 10 years ago, okay, got our asses hauled into court, and potentially we're going down the same pathway again. So if we're trying to push too hard to the community with regards to change, we're up for litigation. We're up for, we've got 25% of people don't even acknowledge the fact that we've got climate change as a problem. So do we need to see, really, if we really want to get some serious change happening here, we really need to see that from a national level. Would that be a fair comment? And I'd be interested in Jake and your view on that as well.
I would say I think they work hand in hand.
Yeah.
There is definitely, I think some of the potential feedback that we've heard about the National Emissions Reduction Plan and even the National Adaptation Plan is it is taking central government a long time to get their house organized as well. You have some councils, this is more about adaptation, but if you recall in Tim's Coromandel, residents took them to court for not acting. So there's both sides of the coin. I do think, like what Nink is saying, there is a lot that can be done at a local level.
I appreciate that.
Land use planning. Yeah.
Those are scary figures that you're putting up there with regards to how we have to change. If we do everything as you advise, we're still not even close. But it's going to be very, very hard for us as a district, unless people buy into this, to get there without that big central government push as well.
Yeah.
It was interesting that both times people picked up on the importance of advocating to central and regional government.
Yeah.
That is really important. Even for us to reduce our transport emissions, one of the challenges that we had when we, as you know, we planned the last LTP, a lot of the funding did not come through that we'd hoped would happen for, alternative modes, bikes, cycleways. So that is absolutely important. But I think it's, to provide neutral advice, there are things that could be done at a local level. Clearly, some people are telling you they think it's urgent and we need to stop stalling and get on with it. But it will be a challenge to figure out what is the best use of the resources that you have.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you for that.
Janet.
I wanted to add one thing.
Hold on, Janet.
I attended the climate change conference in Auckland, and
Did you fly there?
No, it was webinars.
I would have taken the train if there was one.
Took 3 days.
But a big discussion there was around targets, because that's what councils and businesses are doing. But it also was, there was a panel and they were all lawyers, Trip and Trip included, and it was about the risk of setting big aspirational targets and the litigation risk attached to that, which is what has happened in Auckland. So
I mean, that's
basically the advice was,
the coastal issue is just a
if
prime
you
example.
if you set an aspirational target, just say it's aspirational. Don't, be clear on what kind of target it is. If it's a calculated target, that's what you explain, and you have a reason, a pathway to get there. But don't set an aspirational target that is nowhere near defendable, or say it's just aspirational. That was strong advice. Yeah.
Right, makes sense. Councillor Harborough.
Yeah, not much to add. Certainly, as Martin said, daunting. I think really big work ahead. And just thinking about that, I just really hope that this will be quite front and centre when the inductions happen for the new councillors, and there's some good time set aside to talk about this, because certainly it's quite big there out in the community, and something that we're kind of midstream on, and it'll be really important to have that continuity and to take it forward. Don't need an answer, just a little comment from me there.
Councillor Pravanov.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you yet again, Brandy. I noticed that when you were talking about the transport slide, there was a whole lot of facts and figures that you talked about. Are they included anywhere? Are they written down anywhere so that we can get access to those if need be?
The PowerPoint is in your that e-document system that you have.
Yeah. Yes, but there at one of the slides towards the end, you talked, I think it was when you had those two graphs, you talked about a lot of facts and figures to do with transport. They went on the slide, not that I could see, and I'm just wondering if they are available.
They're in the notes.
Okay.
The notes for the PowerPoint. So you should be able to see them in the notes. And I could also provide a link to that modeling program.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I suppose, like us declaring an emergency crisis, a climate emergency was the easy bit, I have to say. And, the next bit is to actually implement it. And so that's obviously what we're wrestling with. And as, I know that I've, raised this before, and obviously was shown today that transport is the biggest contributor to our emissions. And if we're looking at public transport, we need to work with GW on that, because they provide our public transport. So my question around that is, how, or are there any serious conversations going on with them about, and I think their targets are much further out than ours. So are there any really serious conversations with GW about making our public transport system much more amenable to people and potentially even slightly cheaper?
There is usually, when we go through an LTP period, it's preempted by a new regional land transport plan. And in the transport sector, we definitely work as regional groups, Greater Wellington included. So there's definitely a lot of officers' conversations. And as far as I know, usually on an elected member level as well, because our Kapiti elected members for the Greater Wellington Regional Council certainly focus on transport and do what they can to bring it up. And we know that in the past years, I've been involved in lots of conversations with Greater Wellington staff and elected member visiting us in Kapiti. Certainly every time there was a contract up for their public services, and then we were reviewing together with the roading team where we needed additional lines and times to actually tap into the 20-minute service we now have to Waikanai. And the advocacy for double tracking, of course, is continuing with additional bus services to be provided. So some wins have been had, and it's a continuing situation. But any advocacy help from elected members is a good thing.
So what you're really saying, thank you for that, Ninka, but what you're really saying is that they're not on board in terms of us trying to reduce our public transport usage or increase our public transport usage.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's what Ninka was trying to say. I think
I
they
hear
all,
lots of talk. I don't hear any actually decisions about, yes, we can help you on this. That's really what I'm cutting to the chase.
I guess there's two aspects to that. I wanted to add to what Ninka was saying. While we definitely are constantly in discussions, lobbying and advocating with Greater Wellington for improved bus services for rail, there's also something to be said about our own land use planning and what we do here as a council to facilitate that. So land use planning is so complex, and we have, there are concerns about the housing crisis, and we are also promoting development. But if we also, Greater Wellington provides the entire region. They have to provide bus services to the entire region. And it is a real challenge for, I think, them, as we know, to prioritize where it's most important to provide services. So with our own land use planning, it's important to think about existing bus networks, increasing density along existing public networks, trying to, several people in the survey, and I've recognized this myself, talked about things council can do to ensure that we have better bike parking, concerns about bikes being stolen from the transport hubs. So that, yes, there is, I think Greater Wellington is trying to work with us, but they also have limited funds. And we need to also think about what we can do on our end to try and facilitate use of that public transport system as well, and try and help Greater Wellington. If we continue to sprawl our developments, it's harder for them to provide bus services to new areas or areas that might not have a large population. So I think it's on both sides, really.
Jake.
Yes, so I agree with you in terms of...
Hold on. Jake, have you got a response to that?
I'm here with my low carbon.
No, I can't hear Jake, sorry.
I wouldn't respond on the part of...
He needs to speak into a mic.
Bugger, I was hoping that I can catch that fish.
I'm Low Carbon Kapiti today. They are doing a fares review and looking at that sort of side of things. I mean, that's public knowledge, and with a view towards much cheaper off-peak fares, cheaper youth fares, family discounts, group discounts, all sorts of ways where you can get more people on public transport without necessarily increasing the size of the public transport system. Because if you say you had free fares, then at peak times it's free. So why not travel on the peak, which means you need more buses, which means you need to buy more buses and run more buses, have more drivers, use more resources. So their focus is definitely on trying to incentivize that off-peak travel. But yeah, they're looking very seriously at a whole new fare system.
So Jocelyn, back to you before I go to Kirsten.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, Jake, and thank you. But in terms of Brandy, so I suppose you've also got a population that's currently living here. So, and I'm sure that lots of other people can give examples, but at Waikanae, and I've said this many times before, so my daughter, when she used to take public transport to go to Paraparaumu College, it used to take her an hour and a half, walk to the bus stop, take a bus, take a train, take another bus, then walk. And, that is not really, she had to do it because she had to do it, but most people aren't going to do that. And what I often see, it's about using the expressway. So those, if the school children, for example, they take the buses, but when the buses leave, they go down the expressway to get back to their depot. Why don't they do that on the way here? So that's just a thought there. The other thing too is that, with our growth strategy, we're expecting another 30,000 people, and I hear what some people are saying, they don't want growth here, but if you actually don't have a plan, it's going to be it's going to be uncontrolled. And maybe we need to look at, and this is pretty radical, saying, you know, we talk about hydraulic neutrality. Maybe we need to be looking at power neutrality or positive, sending stuff to the grid for those 30,000 houses. On top of that, you've got intensification, which is a decree from the government, but that in many respects is actually making this whole situation worse, both in terms of carbon emissions, plus in terms of climate sustainability. And then, sorry, I know I'm going on here, but then the other part
Yes,
of
you
that
are.
too is actually, so there's obviously reducing emissions, and then there's also climate change and how you can mitigate that. And so I know, Mr. Mayor, you're fully aware of this, and some councillors are too, but maintenance of our stormwater infrastructure is key. And Mr. Mayor, you're fully aware of a 9-month haranguing process to get a drain cleaned out, which has had implications all the way over to State Highway 1.
And where's your stormwater
because of it
leading
being
to?
cleaned out. Pardon?
Where is this leading to?
Well, what I'm saying is that sometimes, you know, some of the basic things need to be done, which actually help mitigate some of the climate change events that are occurring. It's not about putting new things in place. It's about doing some of the other things that we have in place really well.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kirsten.
Oh, thank you for the presentation today. Looks like good, rich, varied information that you got back from the survey. And yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. We just have to do it, right? And in terms of the targets, when you come back, I'm really interested to see how it can be achieved, especially the 2031. Especially, yeah, with some of the things that have been mentioned, you know, the growth in building and industry, and not too many plans to increase public transport to Otaki. So yeah, good challenge for you, and look forward to seeing that in February. In terms of the questions you asked about how do you want it addressed, I actually thought the survey feedback has given a really good steer, and quite in favour of going more in the direction of what the community is asking for, because then they're more likely to actually follow through and do some of the actions. That potentially needs some more work though. Thoughts on purchasing carbon credits? Not in favour. And what's the role of council in supporting attaining the target? Might be better for others here to answer that, but I did think that where we have the ability, let's continue to lead the way, educate, incentivise. And I thought the proposal of seeking more expert advice is sensible. And just suggest that includes advice on what works in terms of getting people to participate. Because, yeah, there's some real behaviour shifts that need to happen in order for people to get on the bus, get on the train. I thought about catching the bus to this meeting. And, yeah, I'm halfway there. Ran out of time this morning, unfortunately. But, yeah, I think it is doable. You know, if you live around the corner from a bus stop and you're coming here. So that aspect is a biggie for me. How do we actually get, you know, people to want to make the changes? So, yeah, see you in Feb. Look forward to it. Thanks.
Sophie.
Yeah, kia ora, everything that Kirsten said. That was, yeah, a really good kōrero. And caught the train up here this morning and was on the train with Carl Farrell from Ngāti Haumia ki Pakakiriki, and he was heading up to put in his Plan Change 2 submission. So all of these kind of intersections, and we were having a kōrero about this very topic. So it's, very fitting. I definitely agree about wanting to have some kind of really clear plans and, some details set out around how the targets would actually be met, so that there is, and coming back to us both for, or the next council, for that briefing in Feb, and then so that can help inform too what target they go for, so as well as that expert advice around the kind of science and the emissions reduction and the potential for meeting those targets. I think as well the things that would sit underneath that is really important to have at that early stage, so that can be understood by both the community but also the people around the table. One other thing that I'm keen to get more of a sense of is, we've talked a bit about kind of land use, and that's obviously come through quite strongly in the survey. How are the teams kind of within council working together to collectively kind of infiltrate that thinking of sustainability and resilience across to some of those really kind of key work streams at the moment, which are pressing ahead with some pretty important work that we're obviously being updated on and have the opportunity to feed into our thoughts, but just keen to get an understanding of how that kind of works at that operational level. Obviously we're aware, but it would be good to kind of shine a bit of light on that too, if that question makes sense.
It does make sense, and I'm wondering, because Catherine Knight's she might be best suited to answer that question. It was basically, how is... Oh, great. Great.
Oh, sorry, you might just need a mic so the people on Zoom can hear you. Yeah.
Why don't you just sit at the desk? Yeah.
This is not my role, but I have, as part of my role, having oversight over the implementation of the district growth strategy, one of the principles of which is to move towards a low emissions future for the district. One of the gaps I highlighted organisationally was that we are lacking the sort of strategic infrastructure, if you will, or scaffolding to ensure that everyone works together to achieve that, because just having those words, which are fine and everyone can relate and support them, in a growth strategy such as that document alone, unfortunately, doesn't mean that it happens. So that is something that I have raised, and I do personally feel that we need to have some kind of strategic vision, both in terms of working together as a council operationally, exactly as you say, so that we're working towards the same goal. Without that, it's very difficult for people to work together towards the same goal because they don't know what it is. And also to connect and engage and partner with people outside council who are all doing fabulous work in this space. So, but it's, that I think there is a bit of a gap there, and that's all I can probably say. Yeah.
And thanks, Catherine. That's helpful. And the way that you kind of framed that around the scaffolding or the support to ensure that there are steps and mechanisms in place to make sure that those words become, really tangible, integrated philosophies and values through which, council both makes its decisions but also implements its work programs. I think that, thanks for framing that up. The other question that I had was around kind of that behaviour change aspect, and people feeling like either they're not able to make a difference or that anything they do, won't even be a drop in the bucket. How do you have any thoughts around kind of addressing, or council playing more of a role in addressing that through the channels that it already has, such as, the waste minimisation education space, and then this new educator that's coming on board? I think also more broadly than that, through council's comms channels, through, public hui, whatever, just through any possible channels. Guru and I had a really interesting conversation with a couple of kind of psychology professors, were they, Guru?
Yeah,
people who are quite quite keen to kind of use their skill sets to connect into this conversation. So I'm just wondering how we capitalize on that knowledge that probably exists within our community, actually, to help build that public base even more broadly, because I think we can see that, as Kirsten was saying, it's pretty clear, and I think we just need to get on with the mahi. But then there'll be some people who just feel like they don't get it, and so what are the tools that we can use to bring them on board?
Yes, the education is definitely a major part that council needs to play, but I'm only advertising for a resource now. And this discussion has been, for the last 3 years, get on and do it, but I actually need the people to do it. And yeah, in year 2, I did find funding in the long-term plan to get somebody on the team, which is what's now happening. And then definitely within our team, we can develop an education program together with the comms team. We're already started working on it. Sophie and I attended a meeting with Norman Elder. So here today, we've decided now to get on board with that. So that program will start to work. Then we will set up that climate funding and do that in the second half of this year. So as soon as I have somebody on board, hopefully say early November if I'm lucky, we will straight away develop that education program. And I do agree with you, yes, we definitely need to work with the groups that are in the community. It's just finding the time and the space, and these people are also busy with their day-to-day jobs like Jake. So yeah, we need to fit around each other's lives, but definitely bring it all together and start that messaging. And Wellington City Council is really developing a large campaign at the moment that they fully intend to be used by the whole region. So we've actually participated in their workshops until now, our comms team as well. And that is a real focus on a system change and a mind shift change. So not so much you need to change your behavior, you need to get on a bike. It's enabling people to understand the whole system needs to change, and that it's a big mind shift they need to make and what role they can play, rather than chasing people off saying they need to do difficult things, to frame it in a wider way. So we're very excited to be part of that campaign as well. So things are happening, yeah.
Right, anybody else? Nope. You got any parting shots? Anything else to add?
Well, I could talk at length, but I'll try and keep it short. I think having a target is important, and you already recognise the limits to what council can already do, and I think the community and the feedback to that survey already knows what council can do, and are pointing quite hard at those actions for obvious reasons. And so yeah, it's about us doing as much of that as you can. I'm interested in the comment about redirecting resources, because this is the big issue around the whole world. Like, we've got limited set of resources because we live on a finite planet. There's a limit to how much punishment the global atmosphere can take before it punishes us with terrible events, and they're already happening on scale we had not anticipated happening now. Stuff that's supposed to happen in 2050 is happening in 2022, which is horrifying. And the issue is that it's a free-for-all. There's no idea that, all right, well, if we're going to do this, then we need to have less of that. Or if we want this thing, then we'll have to go slower on that thing. So, for example, take a motorway and say, oh, well, we could have a low carbon motorway if all the vehicles driving on it were, say, electric, and used renewable energy to make electric vehicles, and you had a recycling system, and you had low carbon concrete to build it out of, etc., etc., etc. But no, we need a motorway right now. We'll just keep researching those things, and maybe someday in the future we'll be able to build a low carbon motorway. But right now we need a motorway, so we're going to build it with what we've got. And so so you're basically allocating a chunk of the remaining resources of the world, including the climate, the atmosphere's ability to absorb pollution, and you're saying, oh, we're going to spend it now. And so really this whole idea of budgets, carbon budgets, hasn't sunk in at all. It is actually policy of government, but it's not actually any signs that they're going to stay within those budgets that have been set. We'll see, of course. Hasn't happened yet. So really, it is about trying to address that elephant in the room about growth. And when I say growth, the link between economic growth and emissions is because we have a fossil fuel powered economy, right? So if we do more stuff, then it creates more emissions, because in order to do stuff, we mostly burn fossil fuels. So there is a link. You could have growth without growth in emissions, but only if you had an economy that wasn't powered by fossil fuels. And until the world at large addresses that, I don't think we're going to make a lot of progress. The technologies we've got are helpful. They are what you'd call necessary, but not sufficient. Yeah, the more that we can come to terms with the idea that there are limits, the better off future generations will be. In terms of carbon neutrality and that sort of thing, I have to say, after being an advocate for many years, it's been brought into disrepute by the likes of ExxonMobil, saying that they can be a carbon neutral company by covering the entire world with trees and relying on technologies that don't exist yet and cost an absolute bomb, even if they did. So that skepticism in the survey about carbon offsets is well founded. Always emphasis has been on investing within this community, because at least then we've got a chance of being a kaitiaki of those carbon reservoirs over the long term. But it's a very tall order, and it does require a lot of land. So there is really, really strong limits around how much of that we can do, given there's other things that we also want to do with our land. Yeah, and also the science. There's this thing called carbon asymmetry, which means basically we can't catch a break. To be quite honest, we've discovered carbon asymmetry, which means putting carbon up in the atmosphere is not the same as taking carbon out of the atmosphere. They are not equal, and unfortunately, that inequality is the wrong way round. If we put 1,000 tonnes of emissions up in the atmosphere, the amount of if you take 1,000 tonnes out of the atmosphere, what happens is the ocean and the soil gives up carbon. It makes it harder, so you have to take out more. So you might have to take out 1,200 tonnes of emissions if you put 1,000 up in order to get the equivalent amount of reduction in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we can't catch a break. Even if we were using offsets, we'd have to plant extra, and a lot extra. Maybe 10% on that. The other thing is, of course, fires. So in the likes of Microsoft and Amazon, all sorts of people have bought carbon offsets in the western United States. And they allowed a reserve of emissions of forest to say, just in case things go on fire, we've got an extra 10-20% up. Actually, might have only been 5% up our sleeves to cover that. They've all burnt down already. So yeah, there are really, really big limitations around net targets and reducing net emissions, because yeah, trees have major shortcomings. The climate system's fighting against us, and direct air capture and all of those kind of carbon sequestration techno stuff, it's the numbers just don't stack up on that. So the more we can do to reduce gross emissions, the better. But anyway, that's enough from me.
I was just going to ask Sophie, have you got something positive to sort of hope for?
Burden gets put on me. No, but I think that something that Jake mentioned, although it kind of had a spin on it that obviously reflects the urgency and the scale and the magnitude of the crisis, is around the point of that though is around like making sure that what we're doing now creates a better future for our next generation, and thinking about the fact that yes, these conversations might be hard to front now, and you know, they might be technical, they might be confusing to some of us, they might be overwhelming, but actually if we leave it any longer, it's just going to get harder, and it's just going to get more expensive, and it's just going to get like, you know, the impacts will have intensified. We'll be operating in a far more tricky environment. So I think that, yeah, how cool is it that we have the opportunity to be involved in this conversation now, where there very much is an opportunity to try tackle the system, take it down, and rebuild one that's going to be better for our next generation. Hopefully that's positive enough for you.
Yeah, no,
Someone
that's
else
good.
can chime in.
Look, otherwise we have to go and do that exercise, you know, the psychology exercise of going in the street and just screaming our heads off. So the next step is you're coming back in February.
Yes, if that's okay.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for everybody. And those who are still online, thank you. And thank you, Jake.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Thank you.
That was great.